When both people stop reaching out, it's tempting to label it as peace. You tell yourself, maybe this is what acceptance looks like. But silence isn't peace, it's pressure. It's a psychological battleground where two nervous systems are quietly testing each other's limits. When communication ends, the real conversation begins. The one between your mind and your emotions, between your need for connection and your need for self-respect. This is where things get real because the absence of contact doesn't just create space, it amplifies everything unresolved within it. For the dismissive avoidant, that silence often feels like relief at first. It's familiar. It's safe. They've built their inner world on the belief that distance equals safety. They need that gap to breathe, to regulate. But for you, especially if you lean more anxiously attached, that same silence feels like punishment. It's a vacuum of uncertainty that your mind rushes to fill with stories. Did I do something wrong? Are they gone for good? You start overanalyzing every text that was never sent, every goodbye that wasn't properly said. And suddenly, you're not living in the present moment. You're living in a replay. This is the paradox of no contact. Both sides think they're protecting themselves, yet both are actually being confronted by themselves. One hides from emotion, the other drowns in it. And yet, both are sitting in the same silence, feeling the weight of what's been left unsaid. The avoidance relief is temporary, a nervous system reset that eventually starts to itch. Your distress, on the other hand, begins as chaos but slowly transforms into clarity, if you allow it to. That's the beauty hidden inside the discomfort. Silence is the space where emotional truth has room to surface. Here's what most people miss. The silence between you isn't just absence. It's communication in a different language. When both people stop reaching out, what you're really saying is, I'm not going to chase you anymore, and I'm not going to risk vulnerability right now. It's a standoff, but not always an angry one. It's more like two people protecting their hearts in the only way they know how. The avoidant protects by retreating, you protect by waiting, and yet both end up feeling unseen, misunderstood, and disconnected from themselves. What makes this silence so powerful and so painful is that it removes the distractions. When there are no texts to interpret, no conversations to analyze, all that's left is you. Your patterns, your fears, your attachment wounds. Everything that's been driving your emotional responses now sits at the surface, but waiting to be acknowledged. That's why this stage can feel unbearable. Because it's not just about missing someone. It's about meeting the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding through them. And that's the real function of no contact. It forces awareness. It doesn't just separate you from the other person, it separates you from the illusion that you need them to feel whole. It confronts you with the truth that the same silence that hurts you is also trying to heal you. It's trying to reset your nervous system, to teach you how to self-regulate instead of outsourcing your emotional balance to someone who may not be capable of giving it. It's easy to think that whoever breaks the silence first loses. But that's not true. The real win is in who uses the silence best. The avoidant might use it to hide, to confirm their belief that emotional distance keeps them safe. You, on the other hand, have the opportunity to use it for transformation, to strengthen your boundaries, to understand your triggers, to rebuild yourself, worth from the inside out. Silence, when understood, becomes sacred. It's the emotional detox your heart didn't know it needed. It strips away the noise so you can finally hear your intuition. That quiet, calm voice that's been drowned out by anxiety and overthinking. And when you finally hear it, you realize something profound you were never fighting them. You were fighting your own fear of being alone. That's the turning point. When both of you stop contacting each other, it's not a loss. It's an initiation. It's life's way of saying, it's time to stop negotiating your peace for connection. You can't build a healthy relationship from a place of emotional panic, and you can't attract stability while you're still addicted to chaos. Silence teaches you to find your center, not in their presence, but in your own grounding. Because in the end, no contact isn't about absence. It's about awareness. It's about learning to stay with yourself long enough to realize that what felt like rejection was really redirection, a chance to reclaim your emotional power. And the moment you stop fearing the silence, you stop giving your peace away to those who thrive in it. So when both of you go quiet, don't rush to fill the space. Let it speak. Let it teach you what your words couldn't. Because that silence, uncomfortable, confronting, and raw, is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your self-respect. For the dismissive avoidant, silence doesn't start as loss. It starts as liberation. When contact stops, their nervous system finally exhales. They feel unburdened, like they've regained control of their emotional world. No more expectations. No more pressure to respond. No more vulnerability threatening the safety of their independence. To the avoidant mind, space is not rejection, it's safety. They've been wired to believe that closeness equals danger, that emotional need is a trap, and that love, real, deep love, will somehow consume their sense of self. So when both of you stop contacting each other, what feels like heartbreak for you initially feels like relief for them. But that relief is deceptive. It's not peace, it's suppression. It's the calm that comes when you push everything uncomfortable under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. At first, the avoidant convinces themselves they're fine. They'll say things like, "It's better this way," or "I needed the space," or "I wasn't that attached anyway." They lean into logic to create distance from emotion because logic is safer than feeling. But as time passes, the mind quiets, and what's left underneath that logic is an ache they can't quite name. That's the moment when the silence starts to change shape. Because here's what actually happens. Avoidants don't stop caring. They stop feeling as a form of protection. Their coping mechanism is emotional detachment. When things get intense, they shut down instead of leaning in. It's not that they don't want connection. It's that connection terrifies them. They've built an identity around self-reliance because somewhere along the line, they learned that needing someone meant losing themselves. So when contact breaks, but they return to what's familiar solitude, it's their comfort zone. But comfort zones are deceptive. They feel safe until they start feeling empty. That emptiness doesn't hit right away. It comes in waves, small reminders that you once occupied a space in their world. The song you both liked, the quiet moment before bed, the text thread they haven't deleted yet, but haven't opened either. And as time passes, the narrative they built to protect themselves starts to crack. They might tell themselves, "I just needed space." But what they really mean is, "I needed space from my own emotions." And that's where confusion sets in. Avoidants are not immune to attachment. They just experience it differently. Their emotional timeline runs in reverse. Where you felt the pain immediately, they feel it later. You spiral first, they process later. You crave connection, they crave distance. But when the silence lingers, the balance shifts. You start finding peace, they start feeling the loss. Not necessarily of the relationship, but of the emotional security they unknowingly received from your presence. And here's the twist most people miss. The avoidance relief from silence is often their subconscious attempt to regain control. It's not about you. It's about regulating their own sense of power. Vulnerability makes them feel exposed, and exposure feels unsafe. So, by retreating, they regain a sense of autonomy. But autonomy without emotional connection is isolation. It might look strong on the outside, but inside, it's lonely. Because control can only substitute for intimacy for so long before the loneliness seeps through the cracks. Eventually, silence stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like absence. And that's when the avoidant faces the very thing they've been running from: emotion. They may not express it outwardly, but internally, they start questioning. Did I handle it right? Why do I keep pushing people away? They may scroll through your old messages, revisit your social media, or think of you during random moments. They won't reach out, not yet, but they feel the pull. The same distance that once felt protective now begins to feel like loss of connection, not just with you, but with themselves. Here's the deeper truth. Avoidants often mistake emotional detachment for strength. But strength isn't the ability to avoid pain. It's the ability to sit with it. And silence forces them to sit with it, even if they try to numb it out. That's why, when you don't break contact, you unknowingly give them the one thing that has the potential to trigger growth: accountability. They can't run from the discomfort forever. They're left to confront it, to ask themselves why they equate closeness with suffocation and why distance feels safer than love. So, when a dismissive avoidant feels relief after no contact, don't mistake that relief for healing. Healing starts when the relief fades. It starts when the silence stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like emptiness. It starts when they realize that independence without intimacy is just loneliness dressed up as strength. And that's the silent truth of this dynamic. They don't heal by being chased, and you don't heal by waiting. You both heal when the silence stops being a game and becomes a mirror. Because eventually, even the most avoidant heart has to face what it's been avoiding all along: that no amount of space can protect you from the need to be seen, understood, and loved. So if you're in that silence right now, wondering what's happening on their end, understand this relief is temporary, but awareness is permanent. And once awareness begins, the story changes. Because even for the avoidant, silence doesn't erase connection. It only delays the courage to face it. For you, the silence doesn't start as relief. It starts as panic. The moment the messages stop, your body reacts before your mind can make sense of it. It's that sinking feeling in your stomach, the sudden rush of anxiety, the constant urge to check your phone, even when you know there's nothing new there. This is not weakness. This is your attachment system firing up. When a bond suddenly breaks, your nervous system interprets it as danger. It's the emotional equivalent of a fire alarm, loud, intrusive, impossible to ignore. You're not just missing the person, you're experiencing a physiological withdrawal from the emotional connection you depended on for regulation. In those first few days or weeks of no contact, your mind becomes its own echo chamber. Every memory, every detail of the last interaction plays on loop. You start looking for patterns, for clues, anything that could explain what went wrong. You analyze their silence as if it's a puzzle to be solved, not realizing that the more you analyze, the further you drift from peace. That's what emotional hyperfocus does. It tricks you into thinking you're gaining control when, in reality, you're deepening your attachment to uncertainty. It's exhausting. But this stage, as brutal as it feels, is actually the beginning of your awakening. What's really happening beneath all that overthinking is something powerful Your nervous system is recalibrating. You're being forced to face a truth that most people avoid, that the comfort you found in someone else was actually a way of escaping parts of yourself. You were seeking regulation through their presence, validation through their attention, and identity through their affection. And now that they're gone, those needs don't disappear. They come rushing back to you, demanding to be met from within. This is the hardest part because you've been conditioned to believe that healing happens through connection, that closure, conversation, or reconciliation will fix the pain. But in this silence, you begin to realize that closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you create when you stop seeking explanations that only reopen wounds. The moment you stop trying to decode their behavior and start decoding your own emotional reactions, you begin to shift from obsession to awakening. It doesn't happen overnight. Healing rarely does. At first, you'll still crave contact, not because you want the chaos, but because chaos feels familiar. You'll want to check their social media, reread old texts, anything to bridge the distance. But slowly, something changes. The silence that once felt unbearable starts to feel quieter. You stop waiting for the phone to light up. You stop checking the time, the wondering if they're thinking about you. You start noticing your own thoughts more. The ones that used to get drowned out by anxiety. That's not detachment. That's growth. Because what's happening is this: you're transitioning from emotional dependency to emotional self-sufficiency. You're realizing that peace doesn't come from their return. It comes from your own release. You begin to see the difference between love and attachment. Love is free, open, and rooted in mutual respect. Attachment, especially anxious attachment, is a form of survival. It's love mixed with fear. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. You begin to recognize that your worth was never supposed to hinge on someone else's availability. That's the awakening moment. When you realize you've spent so much time trying to be understood by someone who doesn't even understand themselves. And that's not judgment, that's truth. Avoidants don't mean to hurt you. They're fighting their own battles with intimacy. But the more you try to pull them closer, the more they run. The cycle isn't personal, it's psychological. And the only way to break it is to stop playing your part in it. This silence gives you the chance to do something radical, to rebuild your sense of self from the inside out, to become the person who no longer needs reassurance to feel secure, to turn loneliness into solitude and solitude into power. Because once you learn to sit with the discomfort without chasing it away, you start to reclaim your energy. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop searching for external validation and start trusting your inner voice again. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you finally detach, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, that's often when the avoidant begins to feel your absence. Not because you've disappeared, but because your energy has shifted. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer feeding the dynamic. You've reclaimed your power, and that change is felt even through the silence. So if you're in that stage right now, pacing, thinking, replaying, understand this, it's part of the process. You're not losing control, you're learning where your real control actually lies. Every wave of emotion, every urge to reach out, is your system trying to detox from dependency. Don't run from it. Sit with it. Let it teach you that peace doesn't come when they text you back. It comes when you stop needing them to. Because the truth is, you're not waiting for them. You're waiting for you. The version of you that trusts, that feels whole, that doesn't beg for breadcrumbs, when you were meant to dine at your own table. That's who's coming next. And once you meet that version of yourself, silence won't scare you anymore. It'll empower you. Here's where things start to shift, quietly, invisibly, and in ways that neither of you can easily explain. The energy between you begins to change. When you've been deeply connected to someone, even through conflict or inconsistency, there's an emotional tether that forms. It's not mystical. It's neurological. Your brain and body have become accustomed to their presence, to the rhythm of interaction, even if that rhythm was uneven. When you finally stop reaching out and begin to detach, the avoidant can feel that withdrawal. They may not articulate it, but they sense it. The air changes. The absence begins to speak louder than your presence ever did. At first, it's subtle. Maybe they scroll past your name and feel a flicker of something they can't identify. Maybe they check your profile just to see how you're doing, even though they tell themselves they don't care. They might not even realize it, but the same emotional distance that once made them feel powerful now begins to feel like a void. And that's the paradox of the dismissive avoidant. They crave independence, but they also crave the quiet reassurance of knowing you're still there, still waiting, still emotionally available, still connected in some way. When that reassurance disappears, something inside them starts to stir. This is where the silent dynamic flips. When you were chasing connection, they felt safe in distance. Now that you've stopped reaching, the dynamic loses its balance. The emotional cord that once anchored them, your attention, your emotional investment, your energy, starts to weaken. And even though they won't admit it, that shift unsettles them. It's not just about missing you, it's about losing the subtle emotional safety net your presence provided. You were the one who made intimacy safe from afar. You did the emotional work that allowed them to stay detached without ever feeling completely alone. But now, without your emotional availability, they start to feel the weight of their own avoidance. The silence that used to be comforting becomes eerily quiet. Their freedom starts to feel like isolation. It's not immediate. Avoidants are masters at suppressing emotional recognition. But over time, that suppression begins to break down. Maybe they notice that they're thinking of you more often, or that small things remind them of your energy. Maybe they begin to wonder if you've moved on. The thought that you're no longer emotionally tethered to them doesn't just trigger curiosity. It triggers something far deeper: insecurity. And that's when avoidants face their most difficult internal conflict. They want to stay detached because closeness feels threatening, but they also don't want to lose the emotional control they once had. Your detachment disrupts their emotional equation. They're used to being desired, needed, pursued, because that dynamic reinforces their sense of power. But when you stop feeding it, the power fades. And with that, the illusion of control begins to crumble. Meanwhile, something entirely different is happening on your end. While they're starting to feel your absence, you're beginning to feel your independence. You've been doing the hard work, sitting in the silence, calming your anxiety, reclaiming your energy. And that internal shift is magnetic. You may not be posting about it, you may not even realize it, but your energy starts to change. You're not waiting anymore. You're living. You're healing. And energy doesn't lie. It communicates more loudly than words ever could. When the avoidant feels that shift, that you're no longer emotionally available, that they can't rely on your need for them, it often triggers a strange kind of curiosity. They might test the waters. A text, a random, "Hey, how have you been?" Something casual, designed to gauge if the door is still open. They're not ready for vulnerability yet. They're checking if you still exist emotionally in the space they left you. And in that moment, your response, or your lack of one, determines whether the pattern repeats or dissolves. If you engage from your old place, over-explaining, over-giving, over-hoping, the cycle restarts. But if you stay centered, grounded, and self-assured, you shift the dynamic permanently. Because you're no longer communicating from fear, you're communicating from strength. And the avoidant feels that. For the first time, they're not dealing with the version of you that needed them. They're dealing with the version of you that chooses yourself. That's when the invisible energy fully transforms. And here's the thing, whether or not they reach out isn't the real victory. The victory is that you've reclaimed your emotional authority. You're no longer caught in the push-pull dynamic that once defined you. You've stopped reacting and started leading, not to manipulate them, but to liberate yourself. The power you thought they took from you was never gone. It was just misplaced in the spaces where you invested your energy. Now, that energy is back with you, where it belongs. The shift they feel when you detach is not punishment. It's truth. It's the reflection of what happens when emotional dependency turns into self-respect. It's what happens when you stop chasing love and start embodying it. And ironically, that's what often awakens something in them. Not your silence, but your peace within it. Because in the end, people don't feel your absence. They feel your evolution. When your energy stops revolving around them and starts revolving around your own growth, it sends a message louder than any words could ever say. I no longer need you to feel whole. I am whole already. And that realization, for both of you, changes everything. There comes a point where the silence stops being about waiting and it starts being about choice. It's no longer about who texts first, who gives in, or who appears stronger. The silence begins to evolve into something deeper, a mirror reflecting back both of your emotional maturity or lack of it. Because time and space don't automatically heal, they only reveal, and what gets revealed in this stage is who each of you really are when the illusion of control and emotional chasing disappears. For the dismissive avoidant, this phase is unsettling. Their relief has worn off, the emotional numbness has started to fade, and now they're sitting with an uncomfortable awareness. The freedom they once celebrated doesn't feel as liberating anymore. It's quieter, heavier. They begin to feel the cost of their patterns, how self-protection slowly turns into self-isolation. And for maybe the first time, they start realizing that the very walls they built to keep pain out are the same walls keeping love out. That realization doesn't arrive in a dramatic flash. It comes in small, almost invisible ways. The morning they wake up and don't feel as centered. The nights that feel longer than they used to. The awareness that something meaningful has slipped through their fingers, not because of what was done to them, but because of what they were too afraid to do. Stay open. Meanwhile, something entirely different is happening for you. The silence that once felt unbearable is now becoming sacred. You've stopped counting the days, stopped refreshing the inbox, stopped scanning for signs. Instead, you've started observing yourself, your triggers, your emotional rhythms, your old habits of people pleasing or over-explaining. And in that awareness, you begin to find strength. You start realizing that closure isn't waiting for someone to come back and explain themselves. Closure is you deciding the story ends here. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understand that you can love someone and still choose yourself. This is the crossroads, the moment where both of you, consciously or not, are faced with a decision: repeat the pattern or rise above it. For the avoidant, that means asking a hard question. Am I really free, or am I just alone? For you, it's asking, am I really done, or am I still hoping to be chosen? Both paths are uncomfortable, but both are necessary. Because this stage isn't about the relationship anymore. It's about responsibility. It's about deciding what kind of emotional standard you're willing to hold yourself to. If the avoidant reaches out at this point, it's often not from clarity. It's from discomfort. They miss the emotional safety you provided. But you've changed. You're not the same person who once sought validation through their attention. You've learned that silence isn't punishment. It's perspective. So even if they do come back, it's no longer about chasing reconnection. It's about recognizing alignment. You begin to ask different questions. Does this connection nurture me or deplete me? Does it expand my sense of self or shrink it? Am I choosing from fear or from power? And the moment you start asking those questions, the dynamic loses its grip. You see, love without self-awareness is attachment, and attachment without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. The beauty of this crossroads is that it forces you to choose between the two, to either repeat what's familiar or step into what's empowering. This is where your emotional intelligence begins to outgrow the pattern. You stop needing the other person to change and start focusing on your own evolution, because the real win in this silence isn't reconciliation, it's recognition of who you are when no one is reflecting you back. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop waiting for their transformation, you begin your own. The silence turns from emptiness into clarity. It stops being about them and starts being about you. Your standards, your self-worth, your ability to walk away from what doesn't meet your emotional depth. That's the moment you reclaim your power fully. Because emotional maturity isn't about not feeling. It's about choosing what your feelings lead you toward. Do they lead you back into the same cycle, or do they lead you into self-respect? This is the test the silence brings. Can you hold your boundaries without bitterness? Can you let go without needing revenge or validation? Can you wish them healing without losing your peace? Because that's the kind of emotional strength that changes everything. Not just in this connection, but in every relationship that follows. And when both of you reach that level of awareness, even separately, something shifts on a soul level. The avoidant begins to see that vulnerability isn't weakness. You begin to see that loving deeply doesn't mean losing yourself. And whether your paths cross again or not, the silence will have served its purpose. It grew you both in ways that words never could. The crossroads isn't about winning or losing. It's about awakening. It's the moment you realize that no matter how the story ends, you have the power to write the next one from a place of self-trust instead of survival. So when the silence stretches on, don't fill it out of fear. Let it do its work. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing and mean it. There's a point in every emotional journey where you realize that the silence isn't about them anymore. It's about you. It's no longer about who stopped calling first or who cared more. It's about what the distance is trying to teach you. Because when both of you stop reaching out, something profound happens beneath the surface. The old dynamic starts to dissolve, and what emerges is truth. Raw, uncomfortable, liberating truth. This is where transformation begins. The dismissive avoidant, for so long, has equated independence with strength. Their walls have been their identity. They believed that needing no one made them powerful. That detachment was a form of control. But as time stretches, they start to realize that emotional control isn't the same as emotional freedom. True freedom comes from being able to stay open, not from staying numb. And for them, that realization can feel destabilizing. The silence they once found soothing becomes an unexpected confrontation. They begin to see that solitude without connection is not strength. It's self-imposed isolation. That no one can truly be independent in the way they've idealized, because we are wired for connection. And for you, this silence becomes a proving ground for self-discovery. What started as heartbreak slowly evolves into healing. You begin to understand that you weren't chasing them. You were chasing wholeness through them. You wanted them to validate your worth, to make your love feel reciprocated, to ease the anxiety that comes from being unseen. But in their absence, you've learned to sit with that discomfort and not let it define you. You've learned that your peace can't depend on someone else's capacity to meet you emotionally. That's the kind of growth that changes the trajectory of your entire life. It's not that you stop loving them. It's that you start loving yourself more. You begin to realize that love without self-respect isn't love, it's self-abandonment. You recognize how often you've tried to earn what should have been given freely, how you made yourself smaller to keep the connection alive. And in this silence, you finally stop negotiating your value. You stop needing their validation to confirm your worth. Because worth, you now understand, is not something anyone can give or take away. It's something you either claim or you don't. That's where your transformation really takes shape. You start making choices not from fear, but from alignment. You start living in a way that honors your emotional boundaries instead of bending them. The silence, which once felt suffocating, now feels like space to breathe, to grow, to listen to your own voice again. And something shifts. You begin to embody a kind of quiet power. You're not chasing closure, not waiting for an apology, not trying to prove your importance. You're simply existing in your truth, and that truth radiates outwards. And here's the thing, they feel it. The avoidant may not say it, but they sense the change. The energy between you becomes different. You're no longer the person waiting by the phone. You've stepped into your self-worth, and that shift is undeniable. Sometimes it draws them back, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, it no longer controls you, because your peace isn't tied to whether they return. It's tied to the person you became when they didn't. That's the ultimate evolution of this entire dynamic. It stops being about attachment and starts being about awakening. Both of you are being forced to confront your emotional defaults. The avoidant learns that independence without intimacy leads to emptiness. You learn that connection without self-respect leads to self-loss. And together, even in separation, you both grow. Just on different timelines, through different lessons. This is what it means to reclaim your emotional power. It's realizing that you don't need someone else to complete your story. You only need the courage to keep writing it. It's no longer about proving your worth to someone who couldn't see it. It's about living in a way that makes your worth undeniable. And that kind of energy changes everything: who you attract, how you love, what you tolerate, what you expect. So maybe they don't come back. Or maybe they do. But either way, you're different now. You've learned that silence can be a teacher, that loss can be a doorway, that endings can be disguised beginnings. You've learned that when you stop chasing love and start embodying it, the entire dynamic shifts, because the healed version of you will never settle for the patterns that the wounded version tolerated. The truth is, when both of you stop contacting each other, it's not the end of the story. It's the end of the illusion that someone else has to complete what was always meant to be built within you. The distance becomes the catalyst for the most important reunion of all, the one between you and your own power. Because in the end, silence isn't emptiness, it's clarity. It's the space where you stop waiting to be chosen and finally choose yourself. And that choice, that quiet, courageous decision, is what turns heartbreak into healing and healing into transformation.